Hello and welcome to Scottish Ancestral Records. I am Lisa May Young and I'm being joined today by Ken Nisbet of the Scottish Genealogy Society. Hello Ken, how are you?
Oh, not too bad. Sitting in my lounge, looking out the window at the Sainsbury's car park, advertising plug, and I can spot when it's convenient to go across. When it's not too busy in these strange times that we're living in.
It is very strange times because we usually meet through the SGS and do our podcasts, and we were actually meant to do one on Saturday, but I'm guessing that's not an essential journey. So
I would say so. I thought I was around a cemetery yesterday, but it was a nature walk. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Definitely.
But yes, so I think we're going to be talking about parish registers today.
Yes, yeah. I have to say, parish records for me are a bit of I've used them, but I'm looking forward to hearing what you tell us about them because they're a bit of a grey area for me.
Okay, right. Well, Part 1855, of course, before statutory registration, we're dealing with church records. And in Scotland, we talk about all parish registers, or OPRs for short. You hear the term bandied around, but it's the parish registers of the established church, or if you want to call it the state church. Although the Queen is not the head of the Church of Scotland, but Princess Anne, I think, is the head of the Church of Scotland.
Oh, that's changed, hasn't it?
Yeah. So in Scotland, after the Reformation, we have the Church of Scotland, and that's really the only church. But the Church of Scotland has continually split. And in fact, the Protestant churches continue to split. I mean, most recently over the appointment of gay ministers or evangelical Christian movement, as you've seen further splits even in the late part of the early part of the 21st century. Mm-hmm. So we're dealing with church records. So they're called OPRs, but they're church records. Now, after the Reformation, the body governing the church said that every parish should keep a register of births, marriages, or primarily not necessarily births, but baptisms, because obviously your child being baptized.
Yeah.
But what they found was that, okay, in the parish of Errol in 1553, that's the first parish register. That's extant.
Wow.
But not every parish, as you probably know when you've looked at parish registers, a lot of them didn't start till much later, even though there was various acts in the 1660s and later on trying to chase people up to keep these records. Obviously, we have the Civil War, the British Civil War, and that disrupted records. And in some parts of Scotland, Episcopalianism or Catholicism came back. People just didn't keep them. And so you find certain parts of Scotland, even the Western Isles and the north of Scotland, are particularly notorious for not having parish registers until the later part of the 18th century, or even indeed the early part of the 19th century.
Ken, do you think it's a lot to do with the congregation and who was the minister at the time? And
it could be because quite often it wasn't actually the minister who was writing up the parish registers. It would be the session clerk, because as you know, in Scotland, the congregation is administered by a session, usually a group of worthy individuals who would be put together to keep the parish registers. In fact, my brother-in-law is a session clerk for a Church of Scotland congregation in Aberdeen, and my sister's also on the session. But nowadays, I mean, he wouldn't be going around finding people, particularly for saying, go and sit in the stool if you've been misbehaved. That you certainly wouldn't get off with that. But the session clerk would be the person who would really he would have to be somebody who was literate, but it's certainly the case with the early registers with Scots old writing that the writing sometimes will not be necessarily very clear to read.
Oh, that's,
That-
yeah.
that it's something to be well aware of, that the spelling of surnames in particular can be how the name was pronounced, and Nisbet coming across as Nisbet or various others, or Max changing between MEC and MC, and sometimes even with some of my family in Nairnshire using aliases. I've got Kinloch alias McPherson, alias Kinloch. Tended to be more common in the Highland areas. I don't know if it's got anything to do with the Jacobite rebellion, possibly so. Certainly, I know in the case of Glenlivet, it was Catholics pretending to be Protestants, or there was quite a heavy use in Glenlivet of aliases. And you'll see that reflected in the parish register. See McPherson alias Gower. And then they'll drop. The other thing, of course, particularly in places like Nairnshire, is you get the tea names in the fishing villages. Nairn has common surname, for example, is Main, but you get Main Bockle, Main Mine, and so on. So tea names in fishing villages. But the parish registers, now, what's in the parish registers can vary from parish to parish. And generally, you do find that in the cities, there's more information. So, for example, if I take one from Edinburgh, it says that, and this is in 1796, and it's 1797, I should say, it says 21st of February 1797, Colin Quarry, labourer in Pleasance, and Marion Lodi, his spouse, had a son born Monday the 20th, current name John, witnesses the congregation of the Chapel of Ease. Now, the chapel, that's an immediate indication the Chapel of Ease is not a Church of Scotland. That is one of the offshoots, and there were numerous offshoots, some of them with weird and wonderful names like the Wee Lichties and the New Wee Lichties. And it's really partly over to do with the appointment of ministers and or the use of the Bible, particularly in the 19th century. That's really when you get the continuing free church. So lots of splits in the Church of Scotland. So in town, what you may find is sometimes you're not even going to get the mother's name, particularly in the 16th or 17th centuries. It might simply, for example, have said, Colin Quarry had a son called John. And it might not get,
history.
And it might not even give his date of birth. It might simply say baptized, because what the church is interested in is baptisms. Now, one has to also be aware that at one point between 1783 to 1794, the government put a tax on baptisms and marriages and burials. So, being good Scots, we don't pay the taxes. So you suddenly find that a lot of congregations, there's a huge drop. Or they might baptize the first child and say, we're not baptizing the rest. The first child, particularly if he's male, because he might inherit something. So yeah, let's notice that he's legitimate, he's been baptized. And then I forget, or somebody in 1795, you see a whole lot of children from a couple being baptized. That is not an indication of multiple plus. Because if it gives, you'll find that the family said, oh, there's no tax, we're going to get all our kids baptized. And sometimes you find that quite often it's at the end of the parish register, you might find that there's multiple baptisms, or a new minister comes in, so he goes round and he chases all the couples.
So again, Ken, this is where, if you like, social history meets ancestry.
It is, yes, yes. I mean, because the government was putting this tax, people stopped doing it. Stop paying. Now, one thing to be aware of when you're looking at the parish registers and baptisms, if you see the word natural, that means illegitimate. That's an illegitimate child.
Ah.
But yeah, they might say the other word. They might say lawful, so you know that's a legitimate child. That means that the parents have been married, not necessarily in the Church of Scotland, but it's a legitimate child. But if you see the word natural, and that's possibly, you might not see a father's name given, you might see a lawful, or you might see a child baptized post-nuptial fornication. In other words, the child or sex took place before they got married. Sometimes they'll refer to that with baptisms. Always with parish registers, do look for the witnesses' names and look at the surnames of the witnesses, but also importantly, look at all the other entries on the page, because quite often you sometimes can twig that the females' names of the witnesses are not necessarily their married names, they might be their maiden names. Because sometimes, of course, women in Scotland, you could keep your maiden name when you got married. So sometimes the thing. Now, in the Antioch, for example, quite often there's 5 or 6 witnesses, and you might find all the witnesses' forenames is the same as the name of the child. It's almost as if they've gone on, how many Johns can we get, or how many Janets can we get? Yeah, so sometimes you might be lucky, and it might give the relationship of the witness to the child. Dundee's known for that. Dundee's known for giving the Dundee Parish Registers are known for giving that information. I have it with my own family. I've only seen it a few times, but they've actually said it's the child's grandparent or it's the aunt of the child. But occasionally it does happen, and of course that helps greatly. So baptisms, as I say, now when it comes to marriages,
I remember when I was doing my own family research, it was my mum's side of the family, and it was a parish marriage back in that time, and it was late 1700s, early 1800s, and it was the baby had been baptized just after the marriage, just slightly after the marriage, and the reverend had the same name as the family. So I was like, there must be a family, is it the brother or the, that have kind of just...
Yes, I mean, ministers, of course, through publications like the Vasti, Ecclesiae Scotti, ministers particularly are relatively straightforward to research. You can research ministers. And quite often, if you look at the statistical accounts, they'll quite often give a history of the parish itself, and that always gives you, that's your social history to an extent. If you want to hear about the church buildings, or if a church was out of use, or whether it's a new parish, because obviously the number of parishes, particularly in the cities, expanded enormously in the 19th century. Then obviously we got on to marriages. Now, again, marriage, after the Reformation, they say marriages should be recorded. That's obviously important when it comes to illegitimate children. You have to know that the parents have been married. So what you're dealing with primarily, of course, is proclamations or bans. Now, bans should be 3 consecutive Sundays in a row. And what you might actually find in the parish registers is not actually the date of marriage, but the last date of when the last bans were read. Now, sometimes you will also find that where the couple came from different parishes, that the band would be read in both parishes. Then it's important to look at the records for each parish, because what's in, for example, if you take, say, Aberdeen, what's in Old Marker would be different to St. Nicholas. So what I think St. Nicholas, for example, has the bride's father's name, which Old Marker doesn't. So if you've got them, always look at both, because one might be slightly different. And you can actually sometimes find that the last date the banns were read in one parish would be different to the last date the banns were read in another parish. So sometimes that's why people get slightly confused to think, well, what date were they actually married? Because it's the proclamation of the banns. Now, as I say,
not taking the information at face value. Just
yes, you've got to understand how it was used. This because these records are religious records. They're not written for state purposes. Albeit when official statutory registration came in, the General Register of Authors called in what they called the historic parish registers, and then later on said, right, well, we'll take the last 25 years of parish registers and stay with the local register. But after that, so by about 1875, they were calling in any other parish registers. So, for example, as I say, from Edinburgh, or bigger cities, you'll quite often get the name of the father of the bride, perhaps his occupation. You might get the occupation of the groom, but you generally won't get the occupation of the woman, of the bride. They very rarely gave her occupation.
I always go back to my family certificate, and it was a train driver's wife or engine driver's wife.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, for example, and I'm looking at an Edinburgh one here, is when they give the address, they say that Tallboat Wine there, Robertson's land. Remember, if you see the word land in a city, a land is not a piece of land, it's a tenement. So when it says Tallboat Wine there and Close Canongate, Robertson's land, and if you see that on, say for example, statute records are certain in parish registers, land means a tenement. Because sometimes you might think, oh yeah, they had land. No, they didn't. So proclamations, divorce was straightforward in Scotland. There was no problem with divorce. We didn't have to have an act of parliament like England. So you could get divorced and get remarried. And it didn't have to be for a specific reason like England, where it was a lot more divorce was controlled. Now, when it comes on to burials, the church really wasn't too fussed about burials because you're in your coffin. What the church is interested in is the payments made for the burial. So the most common one is for the hire of mark cloths. Now the mark cloth is a cloth that goes over the coffin. And generally you'll find that most parishes had what they call a best mark cloth and a second mark cloth. And if your relative had the best one, you can probably think, well, they had a bit more money. And you might get small mark cloth, which would be for a child's coffin. Generally, most parishes, if they had any form of money, would have at least 4 mark cloths. And they always went over the coffin. The other thing, you sometimes see payments for the tolling of the bell, erection of a gravestone. You won't always see, in fact, the date of death. What you might see is the date of burial. Now, generally speaking, apart from the big cities, you're not going to see the cause of death. They just simply say, John Smith, 76, died, dead or buried. You're not necessarily, so you're not going to see cities like Edinburgh and Glasgow, because they had more money, or the parishes had more money. And they had bigger municipal cemeteries. So for example, in Edinburgh, we have Canongate, St Cuthbert's, Greyfriars. Their burial registers are much more comprehensive. They do tend to give ages with children relationships, or give the father's name anyway, usually give an address and quite often give a cause of death. So, for example, if you look at 1832 in Edinburgh, you're going to see a lot of people dying of cholera, because that was the big cholera epidemic here. You're not going to get that necessarily in rural parishes. Or very rarely, if it was a very unusual death, you might say, if it was a murder or somebody was that might be reported, but generally speaking, you won't always see cause of death. The important point date-wise as well to dealing with when we're dealing with church records is when the Free Church was created in 1843, when famous, you probably know Thomas Chalmers, the famous picture that's in the gallery at the Mount, and all the ministers going down. When the Church of Scotland virtually split, almost 2/3 walked out, particularly those ministers from the north. It was over the appointment of the ministers, because the landowner could appoint minister over the head of the congregation, and the congregations naturally said no, or the presbyteries said no. And that gives and that's the Free Church, not to be confused with the Free Church that we think of nowadays. The Free Church that we think of nowadays really came into creation in 1902, when there'd been a split in 1892 between the United Free Church and then the continuing Free Church. And that's partly why, if you walk around Scotland cities, you will see lots of church buildings, or you will see spaces where there was a church building. You know, you can sometimes spot the pillars. You walk past and you see pillars on a street, and you think that's not, and there's a block of flats. And you sometimes think, I mean, there's one near me, and you can go, well, that's where the church probably was. But it would have been numerous, because parishes, you could find in a parish, particularly in the cities, because of all the Protestant churches, you might find that there's 6 or 7 or 8 churches, plus a Catholic church. Now, Catholic church records, of course, are completely different. Catholicism didn't totally disappear from Scotland, but it tended to be in specific areas. So, for example, Glenlivet, Strathclass, the bits of the Western Isles, mainly where the landowner was Catholic himself, like the Gordons in the northeast, and they to an extent had protected the Catholic Church. Their records now, some of their records are on the Scotland's People website, but to be honest, I would use Find My Past, because Find My Past has the Scottish Catholic Church records for the parishes that when it exists, created post 1855, whereas Scotland's People has them purely for the parishes that were in existence prior to 1855. So that's fine if you come from an old established Catholic area like Glenlivet, but not so good if you were, say, dealing with some of the congregations in Edinburgh and Glasgow. So Find My Past, I would say, is definitely it. Now, to actually see these parish registers, the Scotland People website, obviously, has complete digital copies. Both the SGS and Aberdeen North East Family Society have complete collections of microfilms for the whole of Scotland. But obviously, at the moment, you can't go and see them. Now, the indexes are free to look at on the Scotland People website. So the indexes to parish registers, or the whole PRs, I should say. Now, you will find indexes called Scottish indexes on Ancestry and Find My Past. These, in fact, are the indexes taken from Scotland's People, not the website. What, in fact, they did is they took the information from Family Search, because Family Search has got the parish register indexes. So, and of course, they are free to look at. So, if you don't subscribe to Ancestry or Find My Past, then obviously do have a look at Family Search.
Family Search is a great website.
It is, but do beware that if you've got ancestors from Shetland, they don't take into recognition that in Shetland, of course, they use patronymic names. So in other words, Jacobson, son of Jacob, that Family Search isn't necessarily clear on the use of patronymics. It does have that unfortunate fault with it, more for Shetland. And then it would be worth, obviously, with those particular areas, having a look at Shetland Family History Society's website and Orkney Family History Society's website, if you know you've got ancestors from the islands. The Western Island.
Is it quite worth being clear on what you're looking for in terms of that's a Catholic church, that's a church, just so you can, if you like?
Well, what I would say, and I'm going to back up the people on Scotland's people here, is do look at the Church Register's Guide on the Scotland's People website. It does list all the Catholic church records they've got on the Scotland's People website. Now you can always Google the name of the church.
A good friend Google.
Yeah. Remember, of course, with statutory, remember, church records don't stop in 1855. Certainly, as far as they do continue on. And in fact, if you look on the Scotland's People website, what they've started putting on the Scotland's People website is some of the church records for some of the other Protestant churches. And if you look on there, so for example, if I look at Adria, it's got Wellwyn Associate United Presbyterian Church record. Now that could, the UPC comes in post 1855. So you've got church records that were existed because the UP United Presbyterian Churches came out of the secession churches. For example, in Banff, it's got Banff High United Free Church. High doesn't mean it, but that would be the church at the top of the town. When they talk about High United Free, it would just be. So you will find in there a list of churches. But remember that people, if they didn't like the minister, they could go off. They would go off and join another congregation, or for example, I mean, obviously, with the creation of the Free Church in 1843, a lot of congregations came out in mass. For example, in Nairnshire, every minister comes out, all 4 parishes come out, and virtually all the congregations come out. There might have been a slight pressure from the lairds to say, "Oh, right, you know, you've got to stick with the Church of Scotland." So you get two churches and congregations, and people would spot churches, possibly because perhaps they thought the minister was being more dictatorial. Certainly, for example, when it comes to Kirk Session records, for example, which is where you're dealing with discipline. And for example, particularly women with illegitimate children. Being put in the stool.
I was thinking of, I mean, it's a bit maybe the wrong time period, but Robert Burns and his poem about the cutty stool, you know. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, but Burns, of course, is notorious for philander. Yeah, yes, and he had various illegitimate children.
Oh yeah.
So he would have been. I mean, we had a talk at our society recently by the Registrar General, and it was, would Burns be granted a coat of arms? And the comment was the feeling that the church would definitely not have approved of Burns being granted a coat of arms because of his behaviour with certain ladies.
Yeah.
But you will find reference in what they call the Kirk Session records, which have been digitised and are available at National Records of Scotland, and I know they're doing their best to try and get them online and we'll see, and that's in our future podcast, succession records. No doubt about them, and I can tell you about 3 naughty sisters that I have.
No.
And I'm a lover. But church records, as I say, are very. So remember, you go from your census will tell you which parish somebody was born in. And then it's a case of going to the parish registers. Or for example, obviously, if you have a child who was born from 1855 onwards, probability is the parents got married prior to that, so you look for the parents' marriage in the parish registers. And that's how you work that. Obviously, be aware of naming patterns. Say in Scotland, the first son being named after the paternal grandfather, second son the maternal, and the girls the other way around, of course. So look for naming patterns. Look for stuff like monumental inscriptions and headstones, obviously, because it's the same in the burial records. Their existence varies enormously across the country. Some bit. I mean, for example, if I look at the county of Nairn, there's only one parish that's actually got burial records. The other 3 parishes, including Nairn, don't. So one has to accept you're not necessarily going to get 100% information about an individual baptism, marriage, and death. You might find a baptism, marriage, but you're not necessarily going to find a death. That would come through other things like perhaps wills or, as I say, monumental inscriptions, gravestones. That might be where you're actually going to get your death. I mean, I certainly do have some families that don't crop up in the parish registers at all because they weren't in the Church of Scotland, and their particular church records, and because they were members of secession churches, they don't appear. For example, if I take Samuel Smiles' family, the Victorian author, none of his children have been in the parish registers because they weren't in the Church of Scotland. We actually, in that case, have to turn to the family Bible or a copy of the family Bible and say, that's when the children were born.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an unfortunate part of ancestry, isn't it, Ken? Because there's some relatives that you're just not going to find because the records are not there.
Yes, I think you have to accept that there are certain, that with certain families, you're going to get so far with the church record, you can perhaps go on, as I say, to look at stuff like wills, land documents, or estate papers. There are things that you find, but and I would never say give up. But one has to be realistic that we cannot all trace our ancestors back to the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
You know, in Scotland, if you get them back to the 1600s or the 1700s, I would say, accept that as a good thing. Some families you're going to get back, and I've been doing this 40 years. There's some lines I'm not going to get further back. Some I am.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as that I got was my dad's side, and it was back to 1739. And I think there's something quite special about those particular records because they're written, and it's that brown paper, and there's something very special about it being a parish record.
Well, it is. I mean, because you're dealing with documents. I mean, particularly, for example, if you get documents created about the 1740s or 1715, the Jacobite rebellions, which obviously, huge repercussion in Scotland. I've got Linlithgow in the 1715s. Well, Linlithgow Palace, of course, being damaged and so on at the time of the Jacobite rebellions, and then obviously. Or in my case, my grandmother's ancestors, when they were burning down the seminary at Scarland during the Jacobite rebellions, my Catholic ancestors. So, when you have the dates, think about what was going on at the time. If you're writing up your family history, and you know whether your relatives, well, what was going on in the environment at the time. you know, even if you go into the 19th century and you go into the 1820s, and then your Paisley War, you're talking about the Paisley Weavers and the various riots or the various disturbances that are going on, or if it's the 1830s and people dying, well, are they dying of cholera? You know, the cholera epidemic. For example, Samuel Smiles' father dies of cholera in Addington in the 1830s. So looking at these records, they tell us, in many cases, they help us to get the environment which our ancestors were living. You know, they're bringing the family history alive. They're not, as you say, they're not just a page on us, necessarily a page on the screen, although it's very nice to see the original. It is very nice to see the original records, and I would certainly obviously say that if at all possible, do look at the original record rather than necessarily a transcription. As certainly do not assume that the indexes are necessarily 100% correct, particularly on the commercial sites, because they're only as good as the person who transcribed them in the first place.
Yeah, definitely.
No,
Absolutely.
you know, do look at them, and that's why I always say, look at all the other entries on the same page. See if you can't understand the writing, what else is it is. Another thing with marriage is you might see the word cautioner. Cautioner was the person who paid the fee just to make sure that if they didn't get married, the minister would still get some money. The congregation would still see. You'll sometimes see, and sometimes you'll see it says John Smith, cautioner for his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And that way you actually sometimes. So it might not directly say who the father is, but it might say, so quite often you will see cautioner. I haven't seen too many cases where it said that the cautioner had to pay the fee because the couple Stratford.
Mm-hmm.
I will say in places like Wigtonshire and Gretna, you will see English couples coming over the border, because of course in Scotland, what we call a regular marriage, i.e., not going before the minister, was not exactly unusual, and then you got ticked off for the session. But in Scotland, as long as you were, well, up to 1929, you were 14 if you're a boy and 12 if you're a girl, you could get married legally.
Really?
Up to 1929,
Wow.
12-year-old girls could get married, and 14-year-old boys, it was legal. Changed in 1929 to be 16. But the one important thing with Scotland is you've never had to have parental permission. In England, you had to have parental permission if you were under 21. In Scotland, as long as you had two witnesses, and of course the blacksmith at Gretna, he is not acting apart from the minister. He's one of the witnesses. And there's another witness. He would go and get some yokel to come in, and that's why you get all these marriages at Gretna or Lambert and It's all these English folks scampering up north. And then we started putting in saying that you had to have lived in Scotland for 25 days or have a resident, so to stop all these English people. But that's why Gretna got big hotel, you see.
Oh, well, you know what? History sometimes helps, doesn't it?
It is, but
hospitality centre.
Yeah, so I mean, somebody at work was a bit worried the other day when she thought she had an old man who married a 12-year-old, and I said it was very unlikely, and she did confirm that was not the case.
Mm-hmm.
There would have been very few marriages. I can assure the listeners that I have never come across a 12-year-old. I've come across 16-year-olds,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 15 or 16-year-olds,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly never come up under 12, 13, 14. Never.
That's quite reassuring, because it's obviously a different time in history, Ken, but still there's that.
Oh, I know. Yes, I mean, it really dates back to Roman law, because the Scots used Roman law, and Roman law was that those were the ages that you could get married, and we didn't change it to 1929. But so they are important, our church records. These are what we use. Once we've done the statutory records, we've got the census. And then obviously what we would talk about perhaps next time is stuff like wills and testaments.
That sounds good. So this has been our first recorded and recorded Zoom Scottish Ancestral Records podcast. So there we go.
Okay.
So we'll see people next time, won't we?
Yeah. Okay. So just let me know when you want to do it next time.
No problem. Thank you very, very much to everybody for joining us. And I hope that episode on Parish Records was very helpful. Thank you, Ken, as usual.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
Cheers for now.